Hello. For my presentation, I'm going to be looking at, it's called the Normal School Literary Magazine. The reason I kind of clicked on this one to check it out is it's called the Normal School, and what does that mean in writing? What is normal writing? Who wants to read normal writing? But once you get into it, the first initial description that it gives itself is we're just the sort of lit mag equivalent to the kid who always has bottle caps, cat's eye marbles, dead animal skulls, little blue men, and other treasures in his pockets. So, and there's also a drawing of a shark man holding a knife, and it says, "Trust us, we're normal." So it's more of an ironic name. For the nuts and bolts of it, it's a biannual. It features the gamut of writing, nonfiction, fiction, poetry, criticism, journalism, author interviews, and a really cool multimedia section, which I'm going to get into a little bit more. It's out of the California State University at Fresno. I wasn't able to find a starting date on the website, but just looking through the entries, it's not incredibly old, so it's a pretty new magazine. I think if it initial looks of the site, it's very clean, it's very user friendly. Thumbnails, there's a featured section that will cycle through. One immediate section I was drawn to just looking at the thumbnails of it on the front page is the multimedia section, which at first guess multimedia could really be anything, but like it could be music videos or whatever. But this particular one was a couple web comics. The first one I clicked on was "Thanks for finally joining the 20th century since it's already over" by a woman named Marta Balsowitz. This was a kind of metafiction memoir of an MFA student who hates her professor because he consistently tells her how much more of the past he knows than her. And then she goes back in time in a DeLorean and pops the tires in his time machine. It's kind of funny. There's another one which I think was a really cool contribution to a literary magazine. It's called "When All Is Dark" by Rachel and Beverly Luria, and it could definitely, the quality of the artwork, it could definitely be more of a serial story. But the really cool part about this is it has absolutely no dialogue in it. It has no writing in general. It's all told through pictures. So, and the pictures themselves are very high quality, and like the physicality of the environment, they're in a carnival, is very liquid. It'll change constantly. It's very cool to see that in a literary magazine, something with no actual words in it. There's a really good poetry and fiction in here. All of these literary magazines I went through, I mean, that's the nuts and bolts, that's the meat. But this one, what kind of makes it stand out a little more is it has a really cool interview section. And in the summer, I had the opportunity to help out in selecting and editing selections for Gravel. And that was really cool. And I didn't really get to read any interviews when I was selecting stuff. So I was really interested in what was in that. Like, who are they interviewing, why, what are they asking, what kind of themes are we looking at? And especially considering this one's more of an ironic name of Normal, I'm going to guess these are kind of off the wall interviews. And looking through it, generally most of the interviews with authors are the nuts and bolts. What's your motivation? What's your writing process? Kind of stuff like that. But there was one that was really cool that stood out to me that would appeal to non-authors as well. It was a Q&A with regarding the connection between gameplay and video games and the storytelling aspect of these games. And it was called "Bridging the Gap Between Gameplay and Storytelling, a Normal Interview with Robert Denton Bryant and Keith Giglio." It was pretty cool. These guys didn't make video games themselves, but they wrote a book called "Slay the Dragon," and it was designed to dispel misconceptions that traditional authors and traditional critics have regarding more video game narratives. And if you think about it, and I played a lot of video games in my life, and if you really think about it, there is a ton of storytelling that has to go into this. There's, the character, the plot development, and especially with recent games that are more open sourced, like you have your, not open source, but more free range, I guess, like your Skyrim, where you can have an infinite amount of stories. I mean, somebody has to sit down and write that. And it's a really cool Q&A about, they talk with how narrative comes into play when they create video games, and how you kind of design characters around that, especially the physical look of everything, especially if you play Fallout. My God. I thought that was really interesting, and something I would say the more general public doesn't really think about when it comes to writing. There's also, there's more conventional poets and authors. It's just really interesting to check out. And one one thing I do want to mention, they're all called normal interviews, which the double meaning is pretty cool. Into the fiction, nonfiction poetry, which is it's the meat of a literary magazine. I got a comment on the cleanness of the website. It looks really good. The nonfiction is pretty cool. It ranges from, humorous to depressing, but it's all really informational. There's a section, one in particular that I clicked on just because of the title. I'm a sucker for awesome titles. It's called The Aquatic Ape Hypothesis, or How I Learned to Love My Paranasal Sinuses. It's about a guy who has blocked sinuses, and it just ruined his childhood. And as he grew up, the more he learned about it, the more he fell in love with his ailment. And it's funny. It's by a guy named Dinty W. Moore. And one interesting thing, the author, that Moore guy, he's noted to be a guest speaker and a workshop leader at the Normal School's Summer Nonfiction Workshop. So they do a little self-advertising here, though. The people that are teaching and running the workshops for the summer, they'll put their writing in. So like, hey, you like this guy's writing? You want him to read your stuff? Give us some money and come to our workshop. Smart, I suppose. There's also a series of panel discussions in there, and they're all by the same guy called William Bradley. And at first that was a little, why? But it turns out there's a William Bradley Prize for the essay that they have, which is a contest that they have every year. And I read a few of his essays, and he's good. They range from a lot of stuff, but one, I know I've been mentioning comic books a lot, but he has a whole thing about Superman called The Men of Yesterday. And it's just interesting to read. In terms of fiction, which I'll get into poetry, but there's one I do want to mention of fiction stories. It's called The Bubble Wrapped Heart by Jeffrey Lyons. This one really stood out to me because I thought it was such an original kind of idea. It's about a kid who his dad was very abusive to him, so he wrapped his heart in literal bubble wrap. And as the years go by, he eventually falls in love, and then he starts hearing a popping sound the more he falls in love because the bubble wrap is fading away. I just think that's a really, really cool image to put with that metaphor of love and, overcoming the walls that you put up. In terms of poetry, again, with the theme of this magazine, they're not looking for stereotypical. They're not looking for cliche. They want stuff that's going to pop off the page image-wise and formatting-wise and sound-wise. There's one by J.P. Allen. It's titled Houston, the Satellite Bar, Wednesday, 1:13 a.m. Specific. But it's almost onomatopoeia. There's a lot of bitty bitty boom boom. There's a lot of sounds, and for instance, it just begs to be spoken aloud. So here's one stanza. Of bubbly for trippy cholos and bolo ties, May loafers, Jordans, steel toe westerns, and huaraches, share buckled linoleum, denim hips, kiss cufflinks till hazy dawn. May all awkward flesh shimmy on the present's acid-eaten rim. Like, it's it just drips with sound, and it's just fun to say. There's another poem, and this is from last year. This is called Fix by Sage Curtis. I'm just going to read a little bit. I stitch pills with gins, thinking peak things, pinch sticky skin as if his Irish shirt clings right, it'll fix my mind. Just the kind of the repetitive sound of just the language. Thematically, it's kind of a hard life. So, and it's all kind of the downsides of society, and not the best establishments to be at. There's a love poem here called "In the Grove of Self-Changing Trees," but like I said, I don't think they'll really accept the non abnormal, I guess abnormal is the wrong word. I would say more fantastical. There's some lines in here that are just gorgeous. Like, our bodies do not tighten, but they seal fast around each other, and we kiss the kind of kiss that's entering a glass cathedral, a structure that exists to emphasize the space it contains, while leaving visible all it does not. I mean, it's gorgeous imagery that they're putting up here. And that was by Jessica Jacobs. So in terms of thematically, if you want to submit to these guys, it's going to have to be something off the wall. It's going to have to be something a little out of the ordinary, something that's pushing boundaries, and I really appreciate that. In terms of submissions, they take them twice a year from September 1st to December 1st and January 15th to April 15th. There's a $3 fee for each submission, so you can submit up to 5 poems, and it would be $3 for each poem. So 15, and I have mixed feelings about that. On one hand, as a publisher, you can basically guarantee the writer will care about the submission guidelines, and if it's their money, people tend to care. And on the opposite end, it's $3. We're broke. We're writers. Again, it's pretty typical. It's 12-point font, 1-inch margins, all that stuff. They don't accept digital, don't mail anything. They'll take creative nonfiction to fiction. But one other thing with poetry that I thought was interesting is they will say they do recommend that you limit the amount of cat poems that you submit unless they're very good cat poems. And I think that in itself just encompasses the entire feeling and aspect of this literary journal, which was really cool to read.